Now, when thinking about creativity, we tend to focus on the sexier end of the business, which is that of idea generation, producing ideas that are both novel and useful. But just as important as that is an initial stage of the process, and that of problem exploration, actually holding yourself back from the second stage thinking process of solving the problem, and actually spending time exploring it in the first instance. There was a nice example of this at a recent Idea Centre meeting when one of the members identified a particular problem that they'd been tussling with, and that was all relating to insufficient car parking space. It was interesting because there were a number of other organisations that shared the same kind of issue. We used a couple of techniques to make sure we explore the problem thoroughly in the first instance, and the first of those was input-output analysis. The way this technique works is to first of all identify the key focus, which in this particular instance was not enough car parking space. And then you look to identify the causes of that ultimate output. So you look at inputs that might generate that particular output, and then each one of those becomes an output of another input, and you kind of trace back over time. The idea being for the problem owner to map out the causal relationships that give rise to the ultimate problem. And often it's the case where you might want to take the problem itself or the focus and identify what's the consequence of that, because it might well be that you're identifying as a focus the wrong element of the problem. In this particular case, we followed one particular path, which was to identify that most people bring cars to work, that in turn causing the insufficient and inadequacy of the car parking space. And then behind that, the fact that staff were reluctant to work from home as one of the factors that meant that everyone brought a car to work. And by looking at a whole range of different areas, the problem owner quickly identified that actually the focus for the creativity was not around how to build more car parking space, but was precisely that issue of staff reluctance to work from home. So that generated a fresh problem definition, if you like, which was how can we encourage people to work off-site. We used the second technique here, and that was boundary examination, a regular favourite that we tend to use. The way this particular process works is to look at the problem definition, how can we encourage people to work off-site, then to identify the keywords and isolate each of those words, then hold a group brainstorming session around each one to generate a multiplicity of words around those keywords. And the problem owner can then select the relevant ones and reconstruct the problem, having given it far greater consideration as a result of the stimulation or provocation that's flowed out of the technique. Keywords in this particular instance were quite straightforward. We forget how can, that's just problem construction. But the keywords we identified were encourage, people, work, and then we grouped off-site together as one word. Now, this particular technique is a nice example of the classic front end of the creative problem-solving cycle. We start with the problem as stated. You then use this particular brainstorming technique, which effectively is a divergent thinking process, suspending judgment and encourage people to think more freely. You then move to the second stage of the process, which is the convergent stage of the process, where judgment is brought back onto the table and the problem owner is encouraged to redefine or reframe the problem, and as I've said before, either provoked or stimulated by the discussion that's taken place, that's opened their eyes to a much wider range of elements of the problem that can be constructed in a completely different way, and you end up with a problem as understood. In this particular instance, the problem as understood became in what way might the leadership team totally trust staff to be productive when working from home. Now this is interesting because that is an absolute transformation. If you look at the initial focus, which was all about not having enough car parking space, the problem has become something completely different. Now far more profound and all to do with trust and culture across the organisation. Obviously if we can crack this particular problem, running through to the next phase of idea generation, not only will we solve the car parking problem, but we'll probably solve a whole host of other issues as well. Interesting stuff, as ever.